All right, everybody, I am back with a brand new DC update. And yes, as the title suggests, Warner Brothers obviously hates making money. And we're going to take a look at some more stuff and more information that got released over the last couple of days in regards to what we were supposed to get versus what we got. And it is very disheartening, and I'm wondering why this stuff is getting released. And I'll talk a little bit about speculation that on the end. But I wanted to show you guys what I was working on and why my update is late. So as you guys know, I do have a theater room. And in the back of my theater room, I have 4 arcades. I have a full stand-up arcade. I have a full-blown virtual pinball table, full size, that I built 3 years ago. I have this Hydro Thunder cabinet that does have the seat. It's moved out of the way so we could work on this cabinet. And then I had this beat-up House of the Dead cabinet. Now, I'm not using House of the Dead, but I am using this, and we've outfitted it with a modern TV, and I will be getting some Sinden light guns to be able to play games, old games and newer games on this. And so this is what I was working on today as we were getting this modded. Otherwise, I would have had this video up a lot sooner. You can see all my comic books that I'm cataloging off to the side there. But that's what kept me busy today. Otherwise, I would have had this video up a lot sooner. But let's take a look at some of these photos. So this is the first photo I wanted to talk about. And this is James Gunn's favorite picks on Batman in general. And to me, with what he chose, I'm not quite sure he's a true Batman fan. But we're going to take a look at what his choices are. So it says, DC Studios co-chair and co-CEO James Gunn has revealed some of his absolute favorite Batman comics. On Threads, a fan asked Gunn to name his favorite Batman story. In response, the filmmaker noted that he has so many favorites, but narrowing it down to 3 picks. Grant Morrison's run on Batman, which I did not care for. I am not a Grant. For anybody who knows me, I do not like Grant Morrison at all. You've got Batman The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb, and that is a good story. And Tim Sale, and Batman One Day, by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. And then Batman One Bad Day, The Riddler, #1 by Tom King and Mitch Gerads. Now, these are all more current things. There are a lot of things in the past that he tends to choose more modern stuff, which is fine. But it says, notably, King in particular has been handpicked as one of the architects of Gunn and CEO Peter Safran's new DC universe, which is going to be interesting. Now, I don't have a problem with Tom King's writing. Some people do. It doesn't bother me at all. Now, what I have here is a chart showing you the movies and what was happening with DC, how they came out of the gate strong. You could see that as these movies came out, that the dip happened with Justice League, and people, were just, It put a lot of people off when everyone found out what had happened with James Gunn. Now, then you had Aquaman come out the next year and did phenomenally well. And then you could see the nosedive it took. But hey, it started to come back up with Black Adam, and the interest started to be there again. But then the rug got pulled out from underneath the whole DCEU. Nobody asked for James Gunn's Suicide Squad. Wonder Woman 84, while I enjoyed it, a lot of people did not. Birds of Prey came out of nowhere and was not a good movie. This, to me, is the worst DCEU film. And then you had Shazam, which I actually enjoyed, but people just didn't go to the movies to see. It was an unknown character to the main audience, whereas we had our main characters that were being ignored. Now, this is something that I'm going to expand upon here. We're going to actually look at the article that this came from here in a little bit, but it says someone said his name is pronounced Oliva. Jay Oliva said Zack Snyder's DCU would have concluded with Flashpoint. At the ending of Zack's Dark Side quadrilogy, or whatever, we would end up with a Justice League Unlimited version of the Snyderverse. And then you flip it. You do a Flashpoint Paradox. Everybody whose friends are now enemies. And it's a world you don't want to live in. You can reboot the universe and introduce a new cast that way. Because after 10 years, the actors need to go onto something else. Well, we just hit that 10-year mark this year, which is a shame that none of this came to pass. We're going to look a little bit deeper into this here in a few minutes. Now, I don't like how they would have wiped everything out and started with new people, with, finding out that our heroes were in a world they couldn't escape and didn't like what they had experienced. But we're going to look at that story in greater detail here in a few minutes. Now, yesterday I watched a video of The Rock, and The Rock throws shade at DC's new regime for completely ignoring what Black Adam have said, including Henry Cavill's return as Superman. So he was on Heart to Heart, this podcast with Kevin Hart, and I watched the whole thing where they talked about this, and it was pretty fascinating. You can find this on social media. But he goes, I think as business-minded people, you and I are always thinking audience first. Yes, we look at and respect the bottom line economically. But also when you think about opportunity, creating things that are fresh and delivering things for the audience, which is our number one boss. When that wasn't looked at through that lens, it makes things a little more challenging for guys like you and me, where you were like, you sure you want to do this? And it was fascinating to listen to. And basically what this comes down to is, and this photo is kind of funky, like there's something going up his crotch there. I've never noticed that before. That's kind of bizarre. But that's kind of funny, actually. But with this particular podcast and what they were talking about, what's interesting about this, and this is something people have mentioned, that Warner Brothers was never, they were trying to get to that success mark, trying to catch up to Marvel when they weren't Marvel. And they were trying to do this sprint when this needed to be a marathon. And how every time something didn't go exactly right, they would change course. And that's exactly what happened. And we finally had things start to settle down with Black Adam, and then Warner Brothers blew it all up. Because, yes, when Henry Cavill returned, there was a lot of interest came back. There is no question about it. It's why the audience showed up for more for this film than any of the other DC movies that had been released over the previous 4 years. And it's a shame that they did not capitalize on that they did not continue it. They saw that because this didn't get released in China, and they did talk in this podcast about how it could have made another $200 million had it been released in China, and we would be looking at a much bigger success. And it's just a shame. So here's the main thing I wanted to look at. This is that article where it talks about Zack Snyder's secret plan for a Flash trilogy and surprise supervillain revealed. It was Professor Zoom pulling the strings because he had come from the future to basically screw with Barry, Jay Oliva tells Inverse. The DC Extended Universe is full of missed opportunities. Some, like Zack Snyder's original vision for 2017's Justice League, were eventually realized. But most will remain unfulfilled as the DCEU reboots itself into the DCU under the guidance of James Gunn. However, none of those missed opportunities is quite as disappointing as the fate of The Flash, which finally arrived after years of delays only to flop hard with fans and critics alike. It didn't have to be that way, and perhaps no one knows that better than Jay Oliva, a storyboard artist on several DCU movies, who also directed the acclaimed DC animated film Flashpoint Paradox. When we were doing Zack Snyder's Justice League, I was instrumental in talking to those guys about how Flash was going to be in everything, Oliva tells Inverse. In a conversation timed to the 10th anniversary of Flashpoint Paradox, Oliva reveals the studio's original plan for an entire Flashpoint trilogy, leading up to Flashpoint crossover, along with the surprise Flash villain, who would have been pulling the strings all along across the entire DCEU. After directing Flashpoint Paradox, Oliva worked as a storyboard artist for the first 4 seasons of the CW's Flash, crafting most of the show's action scenes. So when Warner Brothers decided to make a live-action Flash movie, Oliva was involved right from the start. I worked with Seth Grahame-Smith, the first director who was attached to The Flash. I did a storyboard for him. I did that test. I don't think I ever saw it, but it got the green light for the movie. When Smith left the project in 2016 over creative differences, Oliva stuck around, and Rick came aboard as the new director. I worked with Rick for like 6 or 7 months on the Flash movie, right up until Rick left in October of 2017. The cast was in London. They were building sets. When Rick left, I switched gears and did the reshoots for the ending of Wonder Woman. While little is known about Rick's canceled Flash movie, The cast at times included Ray Fisher's Cyborg and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. One thing is clear, it was nothing like the movie released in 2023. Rick's movie wasn't the Flashpoint movie. Originally, there was supposed to be just Zack's 5 films and 1 side movie, which ended up being Suicide Squad. But after the success of Man of Steel, Warner Brothers decided to go all in on its cinematic universe. Rick's movie was going to be a series of films, just like Aquaman. I think all of those films they were planning to be trilogies. The Flash movies would have been particularly important to the DCU. However, because of a plan to introduce a classic DC villain, Eobard Thawne, aka Professor Zoom or Reverse Flash. Rick's movie was laying the groundwork for Zoom as the big baddie of the DC universe. It was Professor Zoom pulling the strings because he had come from the future to basically screw with Barry. In the Flash movies, Zoom would be the villain in the background, but also in the ancillary other films. You would see some of the influences of Zoom on the rest of the Justice League. This all would have come to a head in a Flashpoint movie, which Zack Snyder revealed previously at a 2019 fan screening, would have wrapped up his Superman-focused saga and served as a reboot for the entire franchise. At the ending of Zack's Darkseid quadrilogy, or whatever, we would end up with a Justice League Unlimited version of the Snyderverse, referencing the 2000s cartoon that featured a sprawling roster of DC superheroes. And then you flip it. You do Flashpoint Paradox. Everybody whose friends are now enemies, and it's a world you don't want to live in. You can reboot the universe and introduce a new cast that way, because after 10 years, the actors need to go on to something else. For Oliva, that planned Flashpoint movie was also a chance to bring his original animated film to life, complete with its epic world-destroying conflict between the Amazons and the Atlanteans. In both the comic and the cartoon, the story hinges on a fatal love triangle involving Aquaman and Wonder Woman. I wanted to really capture the grimness of the comic, but also lay the groundwork for adapting this as if it was a Marvel live-action film, he says of his 2013 animated film. I just thought that would have been fantastic. Can you imagine Jason Momoa fighting Gal Gadot and then having that love story? All of the missed opportunities, Oliva concludes, with a hint of whimsy. Being a part of it was so exciting. And then having to shift gears and pivot. It's kind of sad. I would love to have seen it get to this point. All right, guys, so there you have it. There was a definitive plan going on behind the scenes, but Warner Brothers kept shifting the goalpost, changing the director's visions, and destroying everything. This is at the hands of the studio. And we have the same things going on now. We've heard about Aquaman 2 being completely changed by the regime to where Juan doesn't even know what they filmed and what is actually going to be shown in theaters and how that's going to end up. And that is why I am boycotting Aquaman 2, because it's not Juan's vision. It's not his movie. It's the studio's movie. And I don't want to see studio films. I want to see the filmmakers make their movies. And it's really a shame that this is happening. We had greatness. We had epic stories being told in the DCEU, and the studio came in and gave us stuff like Birds of Prey. What the heck? Gave us stuff like Wonder Woman 1984, disconnected stuff. And you had James Gunn's Suicide Squad, which I hate. I do not like that movie at all. And it's really a shame that it's come to this point. And now we have the people that did the worst stuff taking over. And it's very disheartening as a fan. Now, why is all of this information, and here's where this gets interesting. Why is all this information all of a sudden being released out there? And there's been a lot of speculation on this. There's some speculation out there that maybe Warner Brothers is allowing this information to come out right now as a way to gauge people's excitement to possibly resume the DCEU. That maybe Gunn stuff will never get off the ground, and then they might go back to the stuff that they already had planned. Because if we wait much longer, the actors will be much older, and it won't make much sense. But we still have time. It's really only been 6 years since Zack Snyder's Justice League. If they move on this quickly enough, we could get a conclusion of this and get this stuff done, and it would match the timeline in which it would take Darkseid to get to Earth. So there is always that hope, and I'm hoping that the engagement and the way people are talking about this online does perk the ears of Warner Brothers Discovery. But I'm not holding my breath, because they have made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and it looks like Zaslav and his crew took over and are continuing that tradition. All right, we will see you guys on the next update.